The deep state is sexualizing your children right now in a government school near you, and the agenda goes much, much deeper than you can imagine. The intention is to destroy not just your children, but our families, our churches, our society, our children's understanding of right and wrong, our liberties, and everything you hold dear. So stay tuned. Last week, we talked a little bit about the history of the public education system, where it came from, and how literally it was communists and socialists and humanists and haters of the Bible and haters of Christianity and haters of individual liberty who created the school system. Well, I want to fast forward a little bit today and talk about some of the crazy indoctrination and the sexualization of the children that's taking place in public schools all across America and actually all over the world right this moment. Some of the stories that I'm going to share with you are almost too hard to believe. And so I encourage you to look into these for yourself. You'll find that we are just scratching the surface. In fact, this is just the tip of the iceberg about what's going on. So we talked a little bit about this special issue that we've done. It's called Rescuing Our Children. And in the original version, we had this article here about the government schools sexualizing, perverting, and confusing our children. In the updated, in the second edition that just came out, we actually included a second article talking about the public school teachers who are resisting this agenda, who are just completely under siege. The education establishment is trying to drive them out. And we actually interviewed the teacher who we opened this article with. His name is Rob Obespiano, and he's a PE teacher in Florida. And he came to our attention because a girl in his school, middle school, mind you, a little girl, decided that she was actually a boy. And the school administration decided, well, she needs to be able to shower and change in the boys' locker room before and after PE class, even though she's a girl. And they ordered this male PE teacher to go in and supervise this whole process. So naturally, he said, no, I can't do that. Just a few years ago, people would be arrested for that kind of thing, for watching a 14, 15-year-old girl get undressed in front of a bunch of boys. Well, in this case, they ordered the teacher to go in and supervise. They threatened his job when he refused. They even threatened his teaching credential. They said, if you won't do this, we might even take your teaching credential away, so you'll never teach in the state of Florida again. Um, this type of thing is becoming increasingly common. We had another story out of Minnesota. This was in St. Louis, in the St. Louis district, where the government school actually decided that they knew better than the parents, and they took an underage boy to go have his genitals surgically removed in what they call a sex change process, which of course you can't change your sex, right? Every strand of DNA in your body defines you as either a male or a female. But they took this child to go have his genitals surgically mutilated, and this is becoming very common. A teacher in Virginia, Peter Vlaming, was actually fired from his job for refusing to use the opposite pronouns for a girl that he was dealing with who claimed she was a boy. And this kind of thing now is becoming ubiquitous. We found out in California now, school districts have been preparing what they call gender support plans and individual transition plans to facilitate the so-called sex changes of these children. One of the questions was that, do your parents know about this and support it? And if the answer is no, then they come up with a plan for how they're going to conceal it from the parents. So there's a whole school staff will be involved in a conspiracy to deny the parents the information about their own children, about their children thinking about mutilating their genitals and injecting themselves full of hormones. Now, the American College of Pediatricians says it's child abuse to try to teach a child that he or she can impersonate the opposite sex through hormone injections and genital mutilation. And yet that's exactly what's happening in the public schools all over America. It's actually very effective. California, the UCLA did a survey that came out in 2018 where they found out that 27% of California children ages 12 to 17 were now gender nonconforming. So, boys who don't identify as boys and girls who don't identify as girls. When I was a child, which wasn't that long ago, it would have been completely unthinkable. I never in my whole life met a boy who thought he was a girl or a girl who thought she was a boy. It's just ludicrous. And yet in California now, at least 27% of 12 to 17-year-olds, the younger generation behind them is even worse. Okay, so the brainwashing is working. We actually just wrote an article recently for Freedom Project. The number of transgender little girls in Sweden has increased by 1,500% in 10 years. Okay, and the government experts say, "Oh, we don't know why this is happening." Of course, they know why it's happening, right? It's because you're brainwashing the children in schools with gender-bending propaganda. Now, I want to show you what some of this gender-bending propaganda looks like. This is part of the drag queen story hour. Obviously, that's a man wearing a dress and some demon horns, so you'd know where it came from, right? Straight from the pit of hell. And these drag queens, so called, are being invited into kindergartens, first grade classrooms, second grade classrooms, third grade classrooms in public schools all over America. Okay, all over America. They're going into these classrooms and they're teaching children that, oh, you might have been born in the wrong body. Oh, you should be comfortable if you feel like a boy or a girl or a gender or a trigender or a bigender or whatever. Take your pick of ridiculous things. Now, this has been going on for a long time. They know it's very effective. They know how to do this. In fact, in the early 1990s, when I would have been still in kindergarten, the sexual revolutionaries came up with this idea. They created a documentary, some homosexuals did, called It's Elementary, talking about gay issues at school. And I want to just play a quick clip of this so that you can kind of see what's going on in here.
Today, the law says that if you're the same sex, two men and two women, you can't get married. It is against the law. And I thought that it might be kind of fun for us to sort of be pretend judges for a few minutes. What I'm going to give each of you is a sheet that just tells you that some people think that it's wrong for gays to get married, that it's not natural, and that it goes against what a family is. Other people think that the state should not decide these things, that it should just be up to two adults to decide what they want to do. What do you think the answer to these questions are? Should gays be allowed to marry? Should they not?
I don't see why they shouldn't. I don't see why they shouldn't get married. I mean, they love each other. It's just like any other people. I think gay people should get married. Guys, if they love someone, let them get married.
So what you just saw, this is a video that was shown to children all over America in the early 1990s by homosexual activists. And remember, a lot of people have a short memory, or some of us weren't even born back then. But in the early 1990s, sodomy was still a crime across much of the United States. The Supreme Court didn't usurp the power to strike that down until the early 2000s. And what happened? Notice what they said in the video. Let's be pretend judges, right? Let's be pretend judges, and we'll consider this horrible ban on loving people getting married, right? Of course, when you phrase the question that way, and you're talking to gullible, impressionable young children, they say, well, of course, we pretend judges should strike down laws forbidding so-called homosexual marriage. And what happened? Within a generation, the pretend judges on the Supreme Court struck down our laws defining marriage the same way that God defines it. So this is a very real problem. This indoctrination is incredibly effective. The number of so-called LGBT students is surging all across America. The number of the children who are fornicating, who are engaging in sodomy, who are experimenting with homosexuality and bisexuality, the number of children who are ending up with sexually transmitted diseases, the number of children who are aborting their own children, the result of fornication, is exploding. Okay, it's exploding. Our families are collapsing. And there's a lot of evidence showing the incredible harm that this early sexualization does to children. In fact, I've got some books right there on my reference desk talking about the incredible damage it does to these children. It harms their ability to, have a future family, to be a good husband or to be a good wife, to be a good parent, to have, a proper sexual relationship with their spouse later on in life, and really it does incredible damage. And we shouldn't be surprised by this. In fact, if you know the history of sexual education in the schools, it actually traces back to a guy called Alfred Kinsey. We talked about this in the second edition of Rescuing Our Children. This was a guy who was responsible for the rape and sexual torture of thousands of little children, some little babies as young as 5 months old. He's actually got these tables in one of his books, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, where he documents the rape of hundreds of little children. Again, some little babies, 5 months old. And they say, oh, we raped this baby for 24 hours and it experienced, 8 orgasms. Wait a minute, what? Babies don't experience orgasms, right? That's crazy. And they define orgasm as crying, screaming, kicking, fighting, biting, passing out. That's ludicrous. That's called rape. That's called child molestation. And any sensible person recognizes this. But Kinsey, a pervert, if there ever was one, said, oh, look, these children, they're sexual from birth. That means we need to start sexualizing them when they're little, tiny children in the government schools. And that's what happened, right? That is really the genesis of sex education in America. Before that, the communist regime in Hungary had tried it under the Bela Kun Bolshevik dictatorship. They started exposing children to this stuff as a way to de-Christianize and break down the moral values of that society. And it was very effective. This guy later went to go work with the Frankfurt School, then came over to the United States as part of the Columbia University with John Dewey, who we talked about last week. So this is where this stuff is coming from, folks. The communist indoctrination is just off the charts. I'm sure you guys remember David Hogg, right? The little boy from that school in Florida who decided that he knew better than his parents' generation, that everybody needed to be disarmed. And the data now is very, very clear about the brainwashing of children, right? The Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation put out a poll last year that showed that 70% of millennials are now socialists, right? They're going to vote for socialist candidates. And people wonder, where did Bernie Sanders come from? Well, he's a direct result of the ongoing indoctrination and the brainwashing of our children. We talked about John Dewey. I mean, the guy was an open, proud socialist communist who went to the Soviet Union, who loved the fact that they were instilling a collectivistic mentality in the children. That was their goal all along. So the sexualization of the children, the indoctrination of the children is now a very serious threat, not just to your children, but to the survival of our republic, to the survival of our freedoms, to the well-being of your family, to the well-being of their children, to the well-being of the next generation coming after them. This perversion, this filth has become so ubiquitous. And make no mistake, this is a tool of the deep state. They aim to break down the family. They aim to break down moral values. They aim to break down the nuclear family and the family structure that really has been fundamental to preserving civilization and to preserving liberty. People with strong families have no need for big totalitarian government, right? We have a family. Families take care of themselves. Mom, dad, the kid doesn't need big government to provide welfare checks and food stamps and housing assistance and all the rest of it. But when you break down the family, when you turn the government into the parent, when you turn the government into God, you end up with atrocities and the loss of civilization and liberty. So that's where we're going, folks. That's why the deep state is using the public schools to sexualize your children. They will not rest until your daughters are fornicating and whoring around. They will not rest until your sons are doing the same thing, until they're ridden with diseases, until they're no longer capable of sustaining a family and civilization and the political institutions of our country. It's like a freight train going over the cliff, folks. You've got to stop it. And the United Nations, we'll talk about in a show very soon here, is integral, is crucial to this agenda. In fact, the UNESCO has global sex education standards where they want to sexualize children all over the world with this perversion. And you can bet your last dollar this is not because they have any desire to make your children healthy or protect them from AIDS. In fact, just the opposite. This is a plan to destroy your children and to destroy our freedoms in our country. I'm Alex Newman. You've been watching Behind the Deep State. Thank you. Remember, YouTube is burying us. Facebook is burying us. So to get this information out, we depend on you, the viewer, to share this. So thank you for watching. God bless. And until next time, take care.